If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. That's an African proverb, and it's been rattling around my head for a while now. Not because it's wise, though it is, but because I think it's incomplete, at least when it comes to what we do. In office automation, you don't always get to choose between fast and far. You're usually being asked to do both simultaneously by people who don't fully understand that those two things are sometimes pointing in opposite directions. And here's the thing that nobody in this space says out loud enough. Fast and far aren't just different speeds. They're different strategies, different philosophies, maybe even different definitions of success. Today, I want to talk about that. Welcome back to Automate Office Work. I'm your host, Justin. I'm calling this episode Going Fast versus Going Far. And I want to be honest about both sides because I've seen teams crash going horizontal and I've seen teams fail going vertical. And I've seen the rare, beautiful thing that happens when someone figures out how to do both in the right order. Let's get into it. Picture this. You're new to a company, or maybe you're a consultant who's just been brought in, or maybe you've been at the same company for 5 years and leadership has just handed you a mandate. Automate more, drive efficiency, implement AI. Whatever version of this you've lived, you probably know what's coming next. You start mapping things out. You pull up an org chart, you do some stakeholder interviews, and what you find is a lot. A lot of workflows, a lot of people, a lot of opinions, a lot of broken handoffs that everyone knows about, but nobody's ever fixed. And somewhere in a spreadsheet on someone's desktop, there are literally hundreds of processes that, in theory, could be automated. So the question becomes, where do you start? And I would argue this is the most important question in automation, and also the one that gets the least attention. Because everyone wants to talk about tools. Everyone wants to talk about AI models and prompt engineering and workflow platforms. But nobody talks enough about strategy, about direction, about the fundamental choice you make before you even open a single piece of software. Because you can be doing everything right tools, right team, right intentions, and still end up going the wrong direction. And that's the failure mode I want to talk about today. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to use two terms, horizontal and vertical, and I want to define them carefully because I've seen people use these words to mean all kinds of things. For me, they have very specific meanings, and the distinction matters. Let's start with horizontal. And when I say horizontal, I mean this. You pick one workflow, one, and you follow it all the way across from the very first trigger to the last output. You don't skip steps. You don't assume. You map every handoff, every decision point, and every person involved, every system touched. And then you automate each piece. So imagine you're working on a contract renewal process. That process might start with a CRM alert. A contract is expiring in 90 days. From there, maybe a salesperson gets a notification. They review the account. They flag it for legal. Legal generates a renewal draft. The draft goes through an internal approval. Then it goes to the client. The client redlines it. It comes back. There are revisions. There's a second approval. There's a signature. There's a filing. There's a CRM update. There's a finance notification. That's maybe 15, 20 steps. And in a horizontal approach, you're automating all of them. You're connecting the CRM to the document system. You're building approval routing. You're setting up signature workflows. You're closing the loop with the finance team. End to end, the whole thing. Now, here's the honest cost of doing this, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's slow, like genuinely slow. Not days slow, months slow. Sometimes quarters slow. Because you're not just automating steps, you're negotiating between people. And the person who owns step 4 has their own timeline, their own tool preferences, their own fears about what automation means for their role. And the person who owns step 12 doesn't trust the person who owns step 7. And leadership is asking for updates every 2 weeks. And the updates are always, we're still in discovery. It requires access, real access, to people who are busy, to systems that have change management processes, to institutional knowledge that lives in someone's head and has never been written down. You will have meetings about meetings. You will build a process map and someone will tell you it's wrong. You will rebuild it. It will still be slightly wrong. You will move on anyway. And when it's finally done, when you've shipped it, you've knocked out one workflow. One. And somewhere on your list are 999 more. So why would anyone do this? Let me tell you why. Because the ROI is real. When you fully automate an end-to-end workflow, the time savings are compounding. You're not shaving a few minutes off one step. You're eliminating the lag between every step. You're removing the error that happens when someone copy-pastes data from one system to another. You're taking a process that used to require 5 people to touch it and make it run itself. And there's something else, something that I think gets undervalued. When you go horizontal, you often discover that 3 of those 20 steps don't need to exist at all. You're not just automating the workflow, you're improving it. You're asking, why does this step exist? And sometimes the answer is, we don't know. It's always been this way. And then you remove it. And the whole thing gets faster, not because you built something, but because you identified something to eliminate. Horizontal automation also earns trust because the teams that lived through the process with you, who fought about step 7, who compromised on step 14, they feel ownership over the result. They use it. They champion it. They tell other teams about it. That organizational goodwill is an asset that doesn't show up on any ROI spreadsheet, but it's real. So who is this for? Horizontal is for organizations that have the maturity to sustain a long project, teams with stakeholder access and political capital, projects where getting it right is worth getting it slowly. And honestly, it's for people who are okay with the fact that the scoreboard is going to look bad for a while before it looks good. Now let's talk about vertical, because this is where most of the real action is happening in companies right now. Vertical automation is different in a fundamental way. Instead of following one workflow all the way across, you identify a single capability that shows up across many workflows, and you build a tool that any team can pick up and configure themselves. So instead of automating the entire contract renewal process, you build a document generation tool, a template library, something that lets any team, legal, HR, sales, finance, plug in their own content and generate a standardized document. You're not automating their workflow. You're handing them a skeleton and saying, you provide the flesh. The appeal is obvious. Speed. You can build and deploy something in weeks. You don't need to understand the nuances of anyone's workflow. You don't need to sit in 8 meetings about how the legal team defines approval. You build the rails. You hand it to people. You check it off your list. You move to the next thing. This is why it's so attractive to legal ops teams, IT departments, and centers of excellence. If you're sitting in legal ops with responsibility for 15 different practice groups, each with their own workflows and their own caseloads, you cannot go horizontal on all of them. You don't have the bandwidth. You don't have the context. And you probably don't have the political standing to get 15 different partners to sit in a room with you for 3 months. So instead, you say, here's the tool. Here are the templates. Here's the training. You figure out how to use it. And that feels responsible. It feels like enabling. It feels like scaling. But here's the part I want to be honest about, because this is where most companies are right now, and most of them are not getting the results they hoped for. When you go vertical, you've handed off the hardest part of the problem, the actual adoption. You've assumed that teams have the time, the context, the motivation, and the technical confidence to pick up this tool and configure it into something genuinely useful for their day-to-day work. And often, more often than anyone wants to admit, they don't. This is the adoption cliff. The tool gets deployed. There's an announcement. There might be a training session, and then usage is low. Engagement drops, and in the postmortem, everyone blames the tool. It wasn't user-friendly enough. The AI wasn't accurate enough. People just don't want to change. But the real issue is structural. The vertical approach assumes that providing access equals providing capability, and that's not true. Capability requires context. It requires someone who understands the workflow deeply enough to configure the tool correctly. It requires ongoing support when the tool does something unexpected. It requires a feedback loop. And here's the uncomfortable analogy. This is exactly what most companies are doing right now when they implement AI. They buy a platform, Copilot, ChatGPT Enterprise, whatever the current thing is. They send a company-wide email. We've rolled out AI tools for all employees. Click here to get started. And then they wait. And the usage numbers come back 3 months later, and leadership is disappointed, and nobody can quite explain why. What they've done is gone vertical at the company level. They've handed everyone a skeleton and called it a solution. The skeleton is fine. The skeleton might even be great. But the flesh, the specific use cases, the configured workflows, the tailored prompts, the integrated systems, that work still hasn't been done. And that's the work that creates value. So, who is vertical for? It's for teams that genuinely serve other teams and can't go deep on each one. It's a valid first layer, a foundation, a way to establish presence and credibility, and to learn what teams actually need before you commit to going horizontal with any of them. But it has to be understood for what it is, a starting point, not a finish line. Okay, we've laid out both approaches honestly, and I want to be clear about something. This is not a debate about which one is better, because that's the wrong question. The right question is, which one is right for this team in this context right now? And the answer is almost always, you need both, but in a specific sequence, and with clear eyes about what each one delivers and what each one costs. Let me give you the failure modes for each. The failure mode of pure vertical is, you've built a library that nobody reads. You have tools, you have templates, you have a beautiful SharePoint page with resources and FAQs, and nobody is using any of it in a way that meaningfully changes how work gets done. The skeleton is there. The flesh never came. That's vertical without horizontal follow-through. The failure mode of pure horizontal is different. It's artisanal at the wrong scale. You've hand-carved every table when you needed to build a workshop. One team has a stunning, perfected workflow. The other 14 teams are still doing things manually because you never got to them. You went far, but only with one person. That doesn't scale. The organizations I've seen do this well use vertical to go wide first and horizontal to go deep second. They build the rails, the template libraries, the tool access, the training, and they use that deployment to learn. They watch which teams pick up the tools fastest, which use cases are getting configured the most, where the friction is, and then they go horizontal on the highest value, most ready workflows. They invest the deep time where it will pay off most. There's also a third failure mode that I don't talk about enough, and it's this: thinking you're doing one when you're actually doing the other. I've seen teams that believe they're going horizontal. They're deep in a workflow. They're building something real. But actually, they've stopped at step 5 of 20, and they've accepted that as done. That's not horizontal. That's a fragment. It's vertical dressed up as horizontal. It captures some of the cost and almost none of the value. And I've seen the opposite. Teams that think they're doing vertical, providing a scalable tool, but they've gotten so deep into customizing it for one team that it's actually not generalizable at all. They've gone horizontal accidentally. Now they have something bespoke that they're calling a template, and it fits one team perfectly and everyone else not at all. Clarity of intention matters. Know which one you're doing and why. Let me give you some concrete signals to look for before you pick a direction. These aren't rules, they're questions. But I've found that being honest about the answers tells you more than any framework I've ever been handed. Signal 1. Who owns the outcome? If you own the outcome, if you're accountable for whether the workflow actually improves, go horizontal. You have the incentive to go deep. But if your job is to enable someone else to own the outcome, go vertical. You can provide the capability without taking on the context you don't have. Signal 2. Do you have real stakeholder access? Horizontal automation lives or dies on relationships. If you can get the right people in a room and keep them in the room, you can go horizontal. If you're operating at arm's length, if you can't get 30 minutes with the person who owns step 8, don't start a horizontal project. Build a vertical tool and let them come to you when they're ready. Signal 3. What's the mandate from leadership? If leadership is saying, show us AI is working, they want something they can see fast. Go vertical. Build something visible. Put numbers on a dashboard. If leadership is saying, fix our onboarding process, or the renewal workflow is costing us deals, that's a horizontal mandate. Respect it. Take the time. Signal 4. How much variation is there across teams? If every team does a version of the same thing, similar inputs, similar outputs, different content, vertical tools are great. Templates, generators, routing logic. If every team's workflow is genuinely different in structure, not just in content, but in sequence and decision logic, then a vertical tool will fit nobody well. Go horizontal on the highest value case. Signal 5. What's your time horizon? 90-day sprint? Go vertical. You can show progress, gather feedback, build credibility. Annual program with executive sponsorship? Make room for horizontal. That's when you have the cover to do something that's slow on purpose. Let's come back to where we started. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I said at the top that I think this proverb is incomplete. Here's what I mean. In office automation, the choice isn't just about speed. It's about what kind of change you're trying to create. Going fast, vertical, broad, scalable. It's about deploying capability. It's about reaching as many people as possible with the tools they need to do their work better. That matters. It's not wrong. It's often exactly right. But going far, horizontal, deep, compounding, is about changing how work actually gets done. It's messier. It's slower. It requires trust on both sides. But when it works, it's durable in a way that vertical rarely is. People don't go back to the old way because the new way was built with them, not just deployed to them. The failure isn't picking one over the other. The failure is not knowing which one you're picking and why. So here's my challenge for you. Whatever project you're working on right now, whatever automation initiative is on your plate, ask yourself honestly, am I going horizontal or vertical? And is that the right call for this context? And if you're not sure, that uncertainty is the signal. Stop before you go further and get clear. Because in automation, starting in the wrong direction doesn't just waste time. It can cost you credibility, stakeholder trust, and budget, all of which are hard to get back. That's it for today. If this episode made you think about a project you're working on, or if you've lived through a horizontal or vertical failure that you'd be willing to share, I'd love to hear about it. Send me a message at justin@automateofficework.com or go to my website, automateofficework.com, and book a call with me or connect with me on LinkedIn. The most useful episodes I do usually start with a conversation someone started with me. Thanks for listening. And until next time, happy automating.